Politics is everywhere, right? It's in the headlines, it's in our local communities, it's pretty much unavoidable. But have you ever really stopped and wondered, how do we even study something so complex? Is it an art or is it a science? Well, the answer to that question has changed dramatically over the years, and that's the story we're going to dive into today. See, this is the big question that's been at the heart of political science for, well, forever. Are we philosophers trying to figure out the perfect way to run a society, or are we more like scientists, gathering data and measuring what people actually do? The push and pull between those two ideas is what has shaped the entire field. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about the traditional approach. For hundreds of years, this was pretty much the only game in town when it came to studying politics, and it really set the stage for everything that came after. Now, the key word here is ought. Traditionalists, they weren't really obsessed with the day-to-day chaos of politics. They were thinking bigger. They were tackling the huge philosophical questions, digging into constitutions and laws to answer one massive query: what is the absolute best way to govern? This whole approach had a really strong moral compass. It was all about big values like justice and liberty. It focused on the formal structures, parliament, the courts, the whole official machinery of government. Basically, the traditionalists were fantastic at describing the blueprint of the box, but they weren't always looking at what was actually going on inside it. And this wasn't just one single idea. It had different flavors. You had the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, who were literally designing the perfect state on paper. Then you had historians like Machiavelli tracking how power shifted over time. And of course, the legal scholars who picked apart the rules that held everything together. But a problem was definitely brewing. By the early 20th century, a lot of scholars started to think, hey, studying the ideal government isn't helping us understand why that election just went sideways or why a revolution just happened. The traditional way felt, well, a little disconnected from what was actually happening on the ground. And this growing dissatisfaction, it led to a full-on rebellion. A new generation came along and said, we need to make political science a real science, like physics or biology. And just like that, the behavioral revolution was born. The change in focus was just night and day. It completely pivoted away from that old philosophical question of what ought to be and zoomed in on the scientific, evidence-based question of what is. It was a massive shift from the library to the laboratory. So picture this. It's after World War II, and a whole new approach, behavioralism, takes the stage. The new mantra was basically, stop debating abstract ideals and start studying things we can actually see and measure. These new scholars wanted data. They wanted to know about the tangible behavior of voters, politicians, and interest groups. So what did this look like in the real world? Well, instead of just reading old books, behavioralists were out there conducting surveys, analyzing statistics, and studying voting patterns. And, this is crucial, they tried to be completely value-free. They wanted to observe politics without judging it, kind of like a biologist studying an ecosystem. The goal was pure, untainted objectivity. But, as you can probably guess, this obsession with being scientific had its own issues. Critics started to argue that by focusing only on what is and trying so hard to be value-free, behavioralism became kind of sterile. Yeah, it could describe a problem with incredible scientific precision, but it offered zero guidance on how to fix it. It had lost its moral compass. This very criticism set the stage for the next big evolution. The field needed to find a middle path, right? A way to be scientifically rigorous and ethically relevant. And this new synthesis became known as the Post-Bevavioral Approach. I mean, just think about the time period here. We're talking about the late 1960s. The world was dealing with huge social and political upheaval. And political scientists felt this urgent pressure for their work to actually matter, to help address the massive issues of the day. Being purely objective suddenly felt like a luxury they just couldn't afford. So this led straight to post-behavioralism. The core idea was both incredibly simple and really profound. Let's keep all the scientific tools we got from the behavioralists, the data, the stats, the methods, but let's aim them at problems that actually affect people's lives. It was a deliberate attempt to finally bring the is and the ought together. This became the new rallying cry, and it was championed by a political scientist named David Easton, who, ironically, had been one of the biggest behavioralists out there. The whole movement was guided by these two powerful words. The idea was that political science shouldn't just be about understanding the world, it should also be about trying to improve it, It demanded both relevance and action. All right, so we've walked through 3 totally distinct phases. Now let's put it all together and see how these different ways of thinking stack up against each other. So here's the whole story in one simple timeline. You've got the long reign of traditionalism, then that sharp scientific turn with the behavioral revolution, which then leads us to the modern synthesis of post-behavioralism, which is really what defines a lot of the field today. You can really see the clear line of progression here, right? We go from the normative or value-based world of the traditionalists to the empirical, data-obsessed world of the behavioralists, and finally to the action-oriented blend of the post-behavioralists, which tries to get the best of both worlds. Honestly, if you take away just one single thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. It boils down the entire evolution of thought perfectly. We started by asking what the ideal world looks like. Then, we shifted to observing the world as it really is. And finally, we started asking how we can use those observations to make the world a little bit better. And that brings us right back to now. In a world grappling with huge challenges like climate change and crazy political polarization, what's the right way to think? Do we need the moral clarity of the old traditionalists? The cold, hard data of the behavioralists? Or that urgent call to action from the post-behavioralists? Well, the real answer is probably a little bit of all 3. And figuring out that perfect blend, that's still the central challenge for anyone trying to make sense of our political world.